Hi everyone, I'm delighted to welcome you to this SSP discussion on solving problems with and for the problem solvers, valuing disability in the publishing industry. My name's Alice Meadows. I work as Director of Community Engagement for NISO, the National Information Standards Organisation, and I'm the President-elect for SSP. I'm especially happy to be here listening into this conversation and introducing this discussion because SSP is hugely committed to diversity, equity and inclusion in all its forms, and disability is an area that has been somewhat overlooked until relatively recently, so it's especially good to be having this conversation now. I'm going to hand over to the moderator of the conversation, Sylvia Hunter of Inera, but I did also want to give a special shout out to her and Simon Holt, who are members of the SSP Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Committee, and who've really done a fantastic job of bringing disability in particular to the attention of that group. Over to you, Sylvia.
Thanks so much, Alice. I'm Sylvia Itzo Hunter. I'm the marketing manager at Inera. And as Alice said, I'm a member of the SSP Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Committee and also of the Education Committee. So we're going to hear from 5 panelists who will talk about their own experiences with disability and work and/or about the work that they do on disability inclusion within their organizations. This panel isn't about why you should value diversity and inclusion and why making disability inclusion part of your organization's practices is the right thing to do. If you're watching this webinar, we figure you already know that. What we hope you'll take away from this discussion is some practical information about how you can start working towards this goal. And we'll also give you a list of resources to get you started. We want to start by acknowledging that while we are looking at inclusion issues through a disability lens today, people's other identities such as race and gender identity and sexuality and class intersect with disability in ways that can profoundly affect their life experiences. We're here to get the conversation started, but it shouldn't end here. The panelists are going to briefly introduce themselves and then we'll jump right into our discussion. So we will start with Catherine Harding-Wilshire. Catherine, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Catherine Harding-Wilshire, and I am the Director of Operations at BMJ. And I'm really excited to be part of this session today. I've worked at BMJ for 26 years, and I'll be talking today about hidden disabilities. I guess to look at me or to meet me at a conference or in the corridor at work, you wouldn't think that I was different, but I have PTSD. Which is post-traumatic stress disorder. And I guess in order to understand what's going on in my head, I need to tell you a little bit about my story. I've had several traumas in my life, starting with the sudden death of my dad when I was 13, followed by the death of my mum after a year in intensive care. She died of MRSA. However, the 2 most recent traumas that I've had has been the bombings in London on 7/7, when the bus blew up outside of our building. But the second trauma, which followed some years later, was that I was on a business trip in the US and I got shot while waiting at a train station to go into DC. The police said it was just it was a drug deal that had gone wrong, and they thought that I was the police running down the stairs when actually I was running to get a train. To be fair, I didn't deal with it very well. I discharged myself from hospital and went back to the UK as soon as I could. I only took 4 days off work and pretended that it hadn't happened. And during the following years, I completely buried it and refused to talk about it in any great detail. During the following years, I was manipulated and groomed by someone in my working life. And it wasn't until something major happened in their life that it made me realize and reflect on what had happened to me and how I was treated after this. And my whole world fell apart. I barely got out of bed for probably the next 6 months. I did a lot of intensive therapy and was prescribed a cocktail of drugs to keep me going. I returned to work at BMJ 6 months later, and I think everybody, including myself, had to manage the new me and not so improved me. The insights I'm going to share with you today will hopefully help you to understand what it's like to live with an invisible disability. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Catherine. And Simon, can you go next, please?
Hi, my name's Simon Holt. I'm a publisher in the books division at Elsevier, and I'm visually impaired. I run Elsevier Enabled, who are Elsevier's disability inclusion employee resource group, and I'm also involved with SSP on the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee, and involved with the Scholarly Kitchen on their Scholarly Kitchen cabinet. I was fortunate enough to receive the SSP's Emerging Leader Award for 2020 for the work that I've done in raising awareness of disability inclusion within SSP, which was fantastic. I have worked in the publishing industry for about 15 years now, and certainly in the beginning, I experienced quite a lot of discrimination in terms of not really being judged on what I might bring to the table, but instead being judged on what I might not be able to bring to the table. And it made me determined that if I ever got a bit higher up, I would use whatever influence that I might gain to try and make it easier for the next generation of people to come through. I feel that we've come quite a long way in terms of society since I started in publishing, in terms of diversity and inclusion more generally. But I feel that the publishing industry is still at the very beginning. I feel that the industry really wants to do the right thing, but I feel that there's kind of a lack of knowledge and understanding about what that actually looks like on a day-to-day level. And therefore what I'm here to do is hopefully just provide a few kind of tips and pieces of practical advice based on the experience that I've had, not just as somebody with a disability, but also as the leader of a disability inclusion network, as to how organizations can, in an affordable kind of day-to-day way, become a lot more disability inclusive and take advantage of the great skills that people with disabilities can offer the workforce.
Thanks, Simon. Bruce, can I ask you to go next, please?
Great, thank you, Sylvia. Hi, I'm Bruce Rosenblum. I'm the VP of Content and Workflow Solutions at Adapon Systems. Previously, I was the CEO of Venera, a company that was acquired 1 year ago by Adapon. I'm new to the world of disability. 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with ALS. In the 3 years that have passed since, I've slowly progressed from being a fully abled and active person to using a walker to move only very short distances. Despite my physical limitations, I still work full-time, and so I think of myself as someone with a disability, not someone who is disabled. But I'm enabled in my daily life by technology, especially voice recognition to replace typing, and a motorized wheelchair, which you can see me sitting in right now, for outside excursions. Most importantly, the problem-solving skills that I've used throughout my career enable me to solve new and ever-changing challenges navigating my daily life and my physical environment.
Thanks, Bruce. Parne, can you go next, please?
Thank you. Thank you, SSP, for having me here today. My name is Malik. I am a deaf professional, and I wear hearing aids. If I am talking too fast, please accept my apologies in advance. Sometimes I require wine to calm down myself. It's just because sometimes I can't hear myself really well through my hearing aids. So with that being said, I wear hearing aids. I'm fluent in American Sign Language, and I heavily rely on American Sign Language interpreters and captions. And I have been with Fidelity since 2011. At Fidelity, I'm a director of Inclusive Experience Lead, and it is a great honor to have a responsibility to establish and head the Office of Internal Accessibility and Belonging program at Fidelity Investment. My goal is to make sure that we have inclusive and accessible workplace for associates of all abilities, with the focus to drive greater innovation and baking accessibility into everything we design, and that too for powerful customer experience. In addition, I have a great entrepreneurial passion for innovation to inclusion because people with disabilities are original hackers and they are original problem solvers, and they have known to solve the world's greatest problems. So I look forward to speaking with our fellow panelists and share our perspective on the importance of disability inclusion.
Thanks so much, Parne. And last of all, we have Lori.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lori Samuels. I am the Accessibility Director at NBC Universal, not in the publishing business. I come mostly out of the technology space. Bruce and I worked together years ago. My connection with disability is through family. I grew up in the 1960s and 70s in Boston, Massachusetts, and my sister has cerebral palsy. She was not even allowed to go to Boston public schools when we were children, like my brothers and I did. She went to a school called, back then, the Industrial School for Crippled Children. We have come a long way. We still have a long way to go. I guess my interest in disability rights and activism kind of came from my experience of, just seeing my sister overcome challenge after challenge. And she is, now has a master's in social work and does advocacy on behalf of people with disabilities in housing access and services there in Boston. I also have a daughter who is on the autism spectrum, which we didn't know until she was 17 after a lot of challenges with mental health. And so, again, to everyone's point, disability can be visible or invisible. And we're here to hopefully partially bust up stereotypes if they're still out there, and also really just kind of start the conversation about, again, those practical tips and how technology can play a role as well. So.
Thanks, Lori. So we're going to jump into our questions now. Let me see if I can advance the slide. There we go. So our first question is, what is the business case for disability inclusion? And I'm going to ask Lori to take the first crack at this one, please.
Sure, absolutely. There is a strong business case for disability inclusion. Let's just start by saying that. There are 1.3 billion people on the planet with disability. That's just permanent. If you think about temporary or situational disabilities, the numbers grow even higher. When you talk about the friends and families and allies like myself who are connected with people with disability, you're now talking about 53% of the consumer market. So it's huge. That's just the potential market. It's $8 trillion in disposable income and spending. So if you're not tapping into the opportunity to speak to this market, then you're definitely missing out on a fantastic business opportunity. Of course, I think some other panelists will touch on even more, the innovation, the problem solving, the creativity that comes out of this community, almost inherent, whether disability was something that was acquired or has been a lived experience, is quite phenomenal. And many of our technology solutions that we take for granted today actually came out of disability solutions. Text messaging was designed for people who are deaf. Physical accessibility, such as wheelchair ramps, we take for granted. They were designed for people in wheelchairs, people on bikes, pushing baby strollers, etc. use them all the time. So many of our modern conveniences and affordances were designed for people with disability as problem solver, solutions. And we see that when we bring people with disabilities into the workforce.
Thanks, Lori. Parne, can you speak to that question as well, please?
Absolutely, Lori. It was a well elaborate summary of business case for disability inclusion. I would like to expand on that as well. It goes back to the definition of the disability itself, as defined by the World Health Organization, that disability is nothing but a mismatched interaction between our body features and design around us. And with that definition, you can simply derive the fact that the disability is permanent, temporary, and situational. It's a design that is causing disability. It is the work that we do consciously, that can cause disability. And in addition to that, one of the biggest, the business case that we have, in addition to the buying power of disability community, is also that when companies focus on disability inclusion, it should equate the profitability. For the first time ever, the Accenture and Disability Inc. organization, they actually partner together. And for the first time ever, we have a research out there that has solid information that says the company practice disability inclusion, we tend to see 28% higher net income, 30% higher, if I'm not mistaken, some revenue, and 20% higher, there's some values out there that I'm not really, I can't remember on top of my head, but there's a really solid research by Accenture, and it's very easily available online for you to see. In addition to that, and to Lori's point, when designing with people with disabilities, you're basically designing for everyone out there. A simple example, like Lori mentioned, that is SMS that we take for granted. Now everybody uses it.
Thank you. And Bruce, did you have something to add to this question too?
I have a slightly different perspective on this. The inspiration for this panel comes originally from a scholarly kitchen post that was co-authored by Simon Holt and a couple of his colleagues a year ago, pointing out that people with disabilities can be uniquely wonderful problem solvers because every single day they have to solve problems that other people don't. And I know for me, especially over the last years, I've lost strength. It's remarkable how I've had to learn to solve problems in a different way. And this was driven home for me one day. I actually had to take a driving test to get some modifications made to my car so I could continue driving. We got to the exit to the parking garage, and the examiner, who knew that my left arm was failing, looked at me and said, "What are you going to do?" Because if you think about it, the driver's window in the US is on the left side, and then you have to reach out and stick your hand out with the ticket. I said, "It's simple. I'm going to put the car in park. At that point, it's safe for me to roll down the window, unclip my seatbelt, turn, stick my right arm over, put the ticket in the machine, and then reverse the process." Well, I had to think through all of that from a completely different perspective in problem solving. And that's just one of so many problems that I have to solve on a daily basis. Well, you turn around and you think about the work that I do every day with our customers, it's all about problem solving. It's helping them figure out new workflows for publishing. It's the exact same skill set. And so that mentality of how do I solve any given problem at this moment, today, in the future, is something that's just uniquely and refinedly well-tuned in people who have disabilities.
Go ahead, Parnay.
I would like to, thank you. Bruce, I would like to say that you are an original hacker. You know how to solve the problem very uniquely.
Thank you. I grew up learning how to program as a hacker. There's no question of that. But I think that hacking instinct goes hand in hand. And maybe Laura, you can talk a little bit about Microsoft and some of what they've done around working with people with disabilities, because that's where you worked prior to NBC.
Yes, actually, I was just thinking about Microsoft has a construct called a hackathon that they do for a week long every year. And the most popular problems for engineers to solve that everyone gravitates toward are in the disability space. So Microsoft, for example, is doing a lot of work in looking at artificial intelligence, AI, applications within disability. They have produced a product called Seeing AI, which utilizes the camera and features on the phone to allow for someone who's got a visual disability to navigate the world and interact with real world objects like documents or signage, and use artificial intelligence to identify that. So there's just a ton of innovation happening in this space. Yeah, absolutely.
Sure, and we're going to come back to that in a couple of questions, just to talk about the wonders of technology for accessibility. So our next question, please advance. What are some effective strategies in the workplace for disability inclusion? And I'm going to ask Simon to take the first crack at this one.
Okay, so I think the first thing to really make clear is there's not kind of one magic bullet. Disability covers a whole host of kind of different things. And as you've probably heard from the various introductions that people have done, actually, we all have quite diverse backgrounds and perspectives. So, I'm really sorry to say there isn't one thing that will just kind of solve the problem, but actually, I think it's more about how you approach this. So processes and frameworks. So, the first thing to understand is that the person with the disability is the expert in terms of what they need. So, you know, you can help them solve the problem and make things available, but actually in the disability community, we often say nothing about us without us. And what that's all about is, you know, exactly that, remembering that the real expert in terms of what somebody needs is actually the person themselves. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is that you need to have a process. So whether it's hiring, you know, if somebody with a disability applies for a job, you have a process to find out what they need instead of panicking because you don't know. When they turn up on their first day, you've already had the conversation about kind of what equipment they might need, what adjustments are necessary, etc. If there is extra adjustments that need to be made, whether that's in terms of flexible working or whether it's equipment, you make sure that there's a process in place to get this sorted out. I also would recommend that everybody here look into a scheme that's just started to come out in the past year or so called the Disability Passport, that I think has proved quite effective. So the idea is that when somebody joins a company, they have an interview and they kind of explain what adjustments they need, and this gets stored securely on the HR system. And as they move through the company and have different managers, the manager is equipped with this information that obviously can be updated as people's needs change. And that means that the person with the disability doesn't have to have a slightly awkward conversation with a new manager every time. It means the manager is, you know, before they meet their new report, is already equipped with some knowledge about what might be needed. So obviously there's lots of information out there online, but I think, and I would recommend people like Purple Space or Leonard Cheshire or the Business Disability Forum as really good sort of resource centres for this. Scope is another one, but those are a few sort of starting points to maybe get you thinking.
Thanks, Simon. Catherine, do you want to take this one next?
Yeah, I was just going to actually to follow on from what Simon was saying. It's you know, everything he said is absolutely right, and I think for people with hidden disabilities, that, you know, you really need to, whether you have one person or 100 people in your business that have hidden disabilities or mental health problems, that I guess you need to put in some framework for employing these people. And if they, you know, and I'm not sure legally whether you have to tell your employer if you have mental health issues or hidden disabilities, but it's to during the interview process or before the interview process, when people are looking online to kind of get a view for what the company is like, is to have some really good snippets or videos, or, you know, just some little takeaways from the company website to show what kind of place that they may be applying for, and which means that, you know, if and when they get the role, then it makes it much easier to feel included in everything that's going on in the company.
Thanks. I see that Lori has something to say. I'm gonna give the mic to Parne first, and then I'll get you, Lori.
Oh, thank you. I would like to basically, you know, add more comment to it. You know, one of the things that we should keep in mind that having a solid business case for the disability disability inclusion is really, you know, goes a long way. Basically, sharing with your senior leadership team or you know, with your allies, and letting them know that why you are focusing on disability inclusion. And basically, you know, when we created the business case at Fidelity, we basically shared the fact that we have a diverse customer base out there, and we need to make sure that our workforce has a reflection of the diverse customers out there. And there's a reason why our diverse customers, you know, they care about us, you know, focusing on disability inclusion, because to Catherine's point, you know, you know, there are a lot of invisible disabilities out there, and we need to make sure that we are tapping onto all the resources So those are the things that we need to focus on. In addition to that, having the effective strategies, also understanding that associate experience is also changing. Our workforce is becoming more digital. We have access to digital technology that allows people with disabilities to join as well. So there's so many things that that allows you to have very effective strategies in the workplace. In addition to that, it's really important when you think about creating the budget and having a cost center to allow focus on a disability inclusion as well. Creating a proper governance and administration and having a team of people focusing on disability inclusion as well. It goes a long way too. I keep continuing, but I would like to hear from Lori as well and chime in a little.
Yeah, thanks, Barney. So I was just to say that there's, from a technology standpoint here, it's kind of table stakes to say that your experiences of applying for a role within a company and the interviewing process. So if you think of the talent acquisition pipeline coming into a company, it's table stakes that process and the tools that are part of that need to be accessible. But going beyond that, if you actually want to be disability inclusive, you need to make that a welcoming experience. You need to make it easy for people to disclose that they have a disability and that they might require some accommodation during the interview process itself. Whether that be, an interpreter for someone who's deaf, hard of hearing, or whatever it might be, that just that extra support and messaging goes a long way to being an effective and disability inclusion. Otherwise, you're not going to get people with disabilities applying to your roles. You're not going to even get that opportunity to bring them in. You can't just focus on your existing set of employees. You really need to think about your pipeline and making that pipeline smooth and welcoming for people with disabilities.
Thanks so much, everybody. And we're going to move on to our next question, which is, what role does technology play in disability inclusion and also disability exclusion? So I am going to ask Bruce to speak first to this one.
Sure. One of the things that has come out of the ALS world, especially in the last 10 years, is a tremendous push to incorporate technology into improving the quality of life for people with ALS. So sometimes it's hard technologies, as I call them, things like wheelchairs. Ironically, in the era of COVID, one of the things we're going to see as companies reopen are automatic doors everywhere so that they're touchless. Well, for me, that's going to be a huge benefit because navigating doors is now a challenge for me. But also around software, there are tremendous technologies. So one of the things that I've done is I've actually banked my voice because there is a chance I will lose the ability to speak, but I'll be able to tap any sentence or paragraph I want into a computer and it will be read back in my voice, not the computer synthesized voice that you might associate with Stephen Hawking, for example. But there are other technologies. I'm sure, Simon, you could talk about screen readers, and maybe you will in a minute. Another one that I use every day is voice dictation. I can no longer type at any kind of normal speed. I can hunt and peck with my right hand, but I can't type two-handed. And so I'm increasingly using Dragon in terms of voice entry for emails and memos. So any of you who've gotten an email from me recently, chances are that was done with Dragon, and I apologize for the typos.
Thanks, Bruce. Simon, go ahead.
So I think we've seen quite a transformation in terms of the role of technology for disability inclusion in the past sort of 10 to 15 years. And I think we can kind of put this in two categories. First of all, there's been a movement from disability-oriented design to universal design. So instead of having to buy specialist pieces of kit, actually you now have things, so the iPhone will be an example, or even the computer is another example, that already comes with built-in accessibility features, which are obviously sort of really important. And when we think of adaptive technology, in general, we also need to think beyond computers. Obviously, computers are great help. I'm wearing glasses today. That's actually, that's assistive technology if you really sort of think about it in the wider scale. The other thing that's really important and kind of feeds into this is technology has become a lot cheaper to access than it used to be. So, 10 years ago, if I'd wanted a voice reader, I would have had to spend probably, $1,000, something like that, on a very specialist bit of software. Now I can download Read Aloud from Chrome and it's free. Or on my phone, I can download Voice Dream Reader, which is amazing and I think costs $15. The mobile phone in particular and the smartphone has led to a whole host of apps that are really useful for people with all kinds of disabilities. So, I was just looking earlier today because I find it impossible to keep up with how many different ones there are, and I found a website that said 45 powerful apps for people with disabilities, and it included loads of stuff that looked really interesting. The great thing about these being free or very cheap is you can try different ones and see what suits you. So the message I'd give here in terms of kind of the what is, there is a whole host of information out there with lots of different products and resources that make the lives of people with all kinds of disabilities really a lot easier than they used to be, and other members of this panel have kind of already mentioned how that's the case from text messaging to voice readers to speech to text and various other different things. My recommendation is think about the end goal you want, do a bit of Googling and just see what's out there and try a few things, because it's amazing what's out there these days, and my life is certainly much empowered because of what technology can offer.
Thanks so much. Parne, do you want to say something? And then Lori.
I would like to add something really important here, that although we have great technologies out there like screen reader that you can download, the iPhone has its own read aloud feature, so there are a lot of technology out there that is already being accessible and available to you. It's important to recognize that if you're working in a company or you're creating a platform that is intended for the for many normal users out there, not for the extreme users, you have to keep in mind that you need to make sure these technologies are compatible with these technologies like screen readers and all that. If it is not, then these technology like accessibility technology will not work with those technology. So there are very simple guidelines out there, which is called accessibility standards and guidelines, and you can look it up online. It's all industry wide. They keep updating it and they make sure that it's working with the latest up-to-date technologies out there.
Thanks. And I have something to say to that actually, which is that one of the things that was an impetus for this panel was that scholarly publishing has been doing a much better job of making our products and services accessible to people outside the industry, but we haven't been doing as good a job of inclusion and accessibility within our industry. Lori, go ahead.
Yeah, well, this is sort of my my wheelhouse. This whole question. As someone who loves technology and was a software engineer and kind of grew up, loving math and computer science, the connection between technology being capable of being leveling a playing field, providing access to everyone, informing, entertaining, everything we think about today in the digital world, shopping, banking, all the things we do in that digital space. And yet what's really disheartening is that because there's a lack of awareness out there of what we're talking about today, disability, how it impacts how people use technology, many mainstream web developers, mobile app developers, tech software developers, they aren't taught about accessibility in school and in university, which is just wrong and is another problem to solve. because what happens is that unfortunately technology becomes a barrier. So this exclusion piece is actually very important to recognize, that if you are not intentionally including, then you are unintentionally excluding as a technology provider, as a creator, as a producer. You must lean into an understanding of the variety of ways that people use all the technology that we have available to us today. Don't assume people are looking at a screen and pointing and clicking with their mouse. It's just not the way everyone does things. So those assumptions are so important to challenge, so important to educate ourselves about as people who produce technology. We are, you're the creators and the makers, and so it's just absolutely critical role to get informed and to, as Parne said, there are standards, there are guidelines, there are experts out there. There's no lack of resources to solve the problems, but you have to understand it's a problem to design and build without inclusion in mind.
Go ahead, Parne.
I would like to add, one point that to Lori's point about the like not having the proper education and training for the developers or content developers or product owners. There's one business case out there that is historic research done by DQ Systems. They said the research says that it costs a lot more money to fix the technology problems if you do it more reactively. Then it costs about $10,000 for one specific design to fix it and to make it accessible. But if you do it more proactively, meaning if you consider the accessibility in the beginning of the design process, that costs about $100. So there's a huge win. There's a huge benefit to the company out there to make the accessibility right in the beginning of the whole process and while working with people with disabilities.
Go ahead, Simon.
And just to kind of chip in, as I recognize I kind of only answered half the question. I think others have talked very eloquently here about kind of the double-edged sword and the exclusion part. One thing I'd just like to mention is that the kind of accessibility piece and the technology piece really feeds into the other thing that we're talking here about, the inclusion piece. For example, I wonder how many people listening to this who work at various companies have done accessibility audits on their job portals. If people can't access your job board and apply for a job at your company because they can't move through the application process, you're not going to recruit them. And however great your policies are and however much you really want to include and take advantage of all the great things, the problem-solving skills, adaptability even, that people with disabilities can offer, if they can't actually access, jump over that first hurdle, if you like, by accessing your website and applying for a job, you're not going to be able to recruit them. So I would say that's kind of something to think about, as Laurie said, the active inclusion piece, as well as everything else.
Thanks, everyone. That was great. Our next question, which to some extent we've already discussed, is what is inclusive design and why is it beneficial for everyone? We've had some answers, but let's have some more. Laurie, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is really just building on what we just discussed, that when experiences are being new products, new services, new websites, whatever it might be, when you're at the design stage, when you're beginning to think about what this is, what the goal is of this product, that's the time to apply inclusive design thinking, and specifically in the disability space, because again, so many developers and designers are just simply unaware that people will be using and interacting with their experiences in different ways than they might assume. So leaning into this problem, doing it early is just the most cost-effective way. It's the most effective way to solve the problem around accessibility that we get to. So anytime you're designing a new product, anytime you're doing any kind of significant refresh on your user interface, there's an opportunity to apply inclusive design principles, which really have to do with, again, awareness, educating ourselves about all these different kinds of assistive and adaptive technologies that people can utilize, and understanding that we're really designing experiences that work for everyone. So.
Thanks. And Parna, you also wanted to speak to this point.
So one of the things that I always talk about is understanding the difference between the universal design and inclusive design. The universal design focuses on one size fits all, and that can be very excluding for some people out there. But when we think about the inclusive design, we really think about making the product, the design, adaptive to one person, meaning it's a one size that fits one person. And how do we do that? It's actually by, solving for the one person, extending the solution to many other people out there. So like, for example, Laurie brought up a great example in the beginning. The SMS was originally designed for people deaf and hard of hearing. Now that solution is now beneficial for so many people out there. Like imagine yourself, very noisy environment, and you are trying to have a conversation with someone on phone. You can because it's a noisy environment, and therefore you text the person. So you don't have to have a disability to use the SMS, right? So that's a great example of the inclusive design that truly benefits everyone out there. And again, so when the main principle behind inclusive design is actually really working with people with disabilities, considering the people who have the most hardest time with it, and you work with them, you come up with a solution, you understand their hack. I like to say that if people with disabilities are surviving until now, they must be doing something right, and they're doing right because they have a hack up their sleeves, and these are the hacks that you can use to solve the world's greatest problems.
Whoops, sorry, I was on mute. Thank you very much. And Catherine, you wanted to speak to this as well, and then I'll come back to you, Bruce.
I was just going to actually add to what everyone has been saying so far, but maybe just something that's a little bit off-piste. And when you're building a new product and you're trying to work out who your audience is and to make sure that it is inclusive, is that the majority of companies now have a D&I committee or various different D&I committees, and potentially it might be a benefit to the business, but also to the people on those various committees to see the new products that are being built and to have a view on what they think will and won't work. Because a lot of the people on disability committees are the people that you're trying to target, or a part of the audience that you're trying to target. And to for someone without a disability to guess what they want is probably not the right way to build a product. But if you ask the people who are in the company, who might not necessarily be in product development, they could be in marketing or production, is to see what they think and get their view.
Yeah, that's such an important point. Bruce, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I want to change the question slightly and ask, why is this beneficial for you? And the answer to that comes in my mind from someone who had ALS named Bruce Kramer, who described everyone else in the world as temporarily able-bodied, made the point that at some point in your life, you are likely to have some sort of disability, whether temporary or whether, in my case, something that is permanent. And so things that are being done around you today may help you in the future. And for me, the perfect example is I used to look at curb cuts and say, that's nice, that's for someone else. And now I look at curb cuts and say, that's really wonderful because they are absolutely essential for me to get around. And think about if you get a sprained ankle and you're on crutches, I can absolutely assure you that a curb cut will be much more helpful than a curb if you are temporarily disabled. And so this design isn't just for those people who have permanent disabilities, it's for those people who may become temporarily disabled, or in the future, even though you're fully able-bodied now, you may become permanently disabled in some way.
Thanks. We are going to move on to our next question now, which is, hang on. This is actually two questions. What messages create a welcoming experience, and what messages create an unwelcoming experience? Laurie, I'm going to ask you to start us off.
Yeah, I think we've touched on this a bit already. Again, if you think about that, I like to try to help companies understand that every interaction with every customer, every potential employee needs to be accessible and welcoming, right? So the difference between just accessible, which we've talked about a bit of, can I navigate this experience? Can I use the portal to apply for a job? That's accessible, and that's a good place to start. But welcoming is asking people, do you need any accommodation during your interview? Many people with disabilities struggle with the question of, what should I disclose that I have a disability? When do I disclose that I have a disability? Do I wait too long, or do I just say it too early? And frankly, there are unfortunately a lot of cases of people who have disclosed disability and haven't gotten the interview or the job. So really making a conscious effort, again, to message that and to actively work with organizations from which you can recruit talent for people with disabilities. That's the difference. Obviously the opposite is unwelcoming, but I think giving that thought and going that little extra bit to make sure that your messaging is clear, that you are welcoming, that you are going to, that there's no barrier, and in fact, it's both inclusive and welcoming.
Thanks, Lori. And Catherine, you wanted to speak to this point as well.
Yeah. Actually, I was just gonna say what Laurie said, but yeah, I guess for me, it's around the hidden disabilities is exactly what Laurie said. When do you say something? And if you do say something, do you think that you're going to be benched, or that they're going to kind of put you in a corner and just keep you there ticking over and not give you the really juicy projects, or things that you may be very well suited to lead a project, etc. And I think for me that that's a really welcoming thing to say, right, well, we know this has happened, but we'd like you to run with this project. And the kind of the unwelcoming side is around, as I say, just being benched and you're sat in a corner until you either leave, or you've proved yourself 100 times that you're capable of something. And which comes first? Do you have to continue to prove yourself, or do you go somewhere and then don't tell the next company that you have a hidden disability?
Thanks. That's a really good point. Simon, go ahead.
So I think there's three things here. So first is, as I mentioned before, about process. And that is basically making sure that when somebody arrives at a company, or you have your first interaction, you're prepared, because you might not always know they have a disability. So, asking open-ended questions at interview, that you ask everybody, how would you deal with X, instead of assuming, is a good thing. But also just really basic things like, someone has said that they have a disability and they have some special equipment or something, making sure that you're ready for it on their first day. I started a job once where nobody had bothered to tell the IT department, and I couldn't do any work for the first 2 days. That's a really good example of unwelcoming, because, well, you can imagine that I felt pretty useless. And then the other thing that I'd say is role models. Part of the reason that disability inclusion is really important is because the like me thing is so important. I can't say that I've really had kind of role models when I've entered different companies, but what I do know is that there's a couple of people who've entered my company recently, and I've had a chat with them, and you can just see them relaxing because they realize that it's not just them. And I think that's where having things like employee networks are good, because it means that people can find a community of people where they feel kind of that they're not on their own, but also that it will help people feel a bit more accepted. So that's why it's important, as we've talked about before, not just to think about the people working there now, but think about how we can set companies up for working in the future. So, with things like hearing loops, for example, you might not have many hearing impaired people now, but when they come into the office environment, wouldn't it be brilliant if they could take part in all the meetings from day one, instead of not being able to?
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Lori.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the some of the good programs that are going on around autism hiring, for example. Microsoft and many others have been making quite a concerted effort in hiring people with autism in lots of different roles. And again, one of those, again, back to the earlier point about problem solvers and, you know, the talent that's out there. But again, the welcoming part of this is actually involving training, not just messaging, but training managers to work well and to give the best kind of support to people with autism, just using this specific example, people with autism in terms of clarity of communication and clear set goals and things like which are actually good, again, for everyone. Kind of funny how these themes keep building on each other. But you know, again, consciously leaning into something like autism at work is a whole program, and it, again, is out there. Look at it, look it up, pick it up, take the same principles.
Thank you, Lori. Catherine, go ahead, and then Parne.
I was just going to add to what Laurie is saying. I'm actually a crisis counselor in my spare time, and the training that we've had, as you can imagine, there's every sort of person who will come across to us. It's a text service, so basically someone in crisis will text in, and you could get anybody. I've had a girl who her parents wouldn't pay for her driving lessons, through to someone who was literally about to kill themselves, to self-harmers, etc. So the training that we have to have in order to be able to deal with whatever comes our way is absolutely amazing. And they've thought of every single type of crisis. And I think to a smaller extent that, you know, businesses should be doing the same. They should be looking at whoever's going to either come into the building as a client or a supplier to the people who are, you know, they're employing. And as you say, with the closed loop and, you know, dealing with people with autism and making them feel welcome and safe, I think there's lots of work to be done there, that it isn't just, you know, normal Joe Bloggs who's going to walk in your door.
Yeah, and we train on all kinds of other things, including some things that might never happen. So why can we not train on this? So we're going to lose Lori and Parne in just a few minutes, unfortunately, because they have to go on other calls. So I am going to switch for a second from our next question to the question after that, and then we're going to come back to this one. And this question is, how can you be an effective ally to people with disabilities? And Lori, I'm going to ask you to go first.
Yeah, just quickly here, I think, again, very important to educate yourselves, as with all dimensions, you know, of inclusion. I think, you know, depending on your role, just assume that you do have responsibility. Let's put it that way. Whatever role you're in the company, just make the assumption that you do have a responsibility to be disability inclusive, and it might take different forms or flavors. If you're a technology producer, you have a responsibility to make sure the experiences you're designing and building are accessible to people with disabilities. If you are in HR, you have a responsibility to train your organization. So think about your responsibilities and take them up. And again, learn about this, learn about, if you're in procurement, you have a responsibility to procure or make sure your company is buying accessible software and technology. So it really touches everything. There isn't a role that I can think of that doesn't involve some responsibility in this regard. So assume you're responsible and educate yourself.
Thank you. And Parne, can I get you to take the next crack at this one?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So how can we be the effective ally, to Lori's point, understanding your responsibility, like advocating for people who don't have the voice, and you know, participating in the employee resource group that focus on, you know, like if you know, like for example, most companies now have the employee resource group, and we have a specific tool that focus on people with disabilities, and then they become a wonderful ally to people like product owners, entrepreneurs, like basically saying that, okay, we can help you make your product more accessible. You can use our hub to give you some more business cases or business resources that you're looking for. And I think one of the hardest things that we all have to go through in every company is that to track down an ally. So once you start tracking them down and you basically make sure that they become the accessibility, disability inclusion ambassadors and champions, and you rely on them to, you know, create the further influence and persuasion as well. But I do agree with Lori's point. It starts with, you know, with you educating yourself, understanding why disability inclusion and why you should be ally, and it plays a bigger role supporting the accessibility disability inclusion.
Thanks so much. And I'm just going to preemptively thank both of you, Lori and Parne, for lending us your wisdom. And then I am going to go on to Bruce to answer this question.
Thank you all.
Great.
Yeah, I think one of the other things you can do at a very personal level is, I think all of us, whether we have disabilities or not, can have good days and sometimes bad days. And I know sometimes I'm having a bad day. And one of the things I truly appreciate in my colleagues, since I've disclosed to them a year ago what was going on with me, is they've been great listeners. Sometimes I just need 5 minutes to say what's on my mind. And yes, it's about my ALS. And then they listen and we move on. And so it's not that my ALS or my disability defines me in the workplace, but to have someone who can just listen to me, not be judgmental, not necessarily come in and problem solve for me, but just listen for a few minutes. And then also respect the confidentiality if it's clear that that's a confidential conversation. That's an enormous help for me. And I'm tremendously grateful for my colleagues who have been able to do that over the last year.
Thanks, Bruce. And does either of you have anything to add, Simon or Catherine?
Actually, no, I think what Bruce said is like super on point, to be honest. You know, look, just like I don't know what it's like to not have a disability, and I don't also know what it's like to have any other type of disability apart from what I have. I think each case is different, and I think just like with any other kind of good behavior, I think just treating each person as an individual, as a human being, is the best thing that you can do. Don't assume, don't judge, listen, and learn together, I think is probably the best advice I can offer.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. And I think also we came back over and over in our planning sessions to the idea that if you want to know what someone needs, you ask them and you listen to the answer. And that's true in a lot of cases, but particularly in the case of disability inclusion, because as one of y'all said earlier, each person is the expert on what they need.
Yeah, if I can just follow up on that, asking is important, because if you do without asking, it can sometimes be very disempowering the person who has a disability. And again, huge thanks go out to my colleagues. At one point they asked, do you want us to reserve the parking spot closest to the front door? I said, no, I'm not ready for that yet. And then about 3 months later, someone saw me struggling one day coming into work. They said, would you like us to reserve that spot? I said, you know, I think I'm ready for it now. So asking rather than assuming and just taking action can sometimes make a big difference.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to move on to, or rather back to what will now be our last question. Come on. No, that's the wrong way. I'm so sorry. Here we go. How can we change organizational culture to support employees with hidden disabilities and mental health challenges? And Catherine, I know you wanted to take the lead on this one.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, everything that we've covered so far the majority of the stuff that we've covered so far, it doesn't matter if you have a physical disability or a hidden disability, you know, everything I think we've talked about goes without saying. But I guess from my point of view as having someone with mental health issues, I would characterize it into kind of 3 categories. It's this, how are you going to attract someone into the business with a hidden disability, or as we've talked about, a physical disability? Once they've joined, how do you make sure that they feel supported, safe, and welcome in this environment? And for me is if you have someone who has a returning from some time away with suddenly a disability, and how do you help them to feel supported and safe, and most importantly valued within the organization, because it's something that they're getting used to themselves. And I think, you know, we talked a lot about promoting culture on websites, etc. And I think that's a really good place for the first place for people to go to, with, you know, as I said earlier, snippets of you know, potentially of people with disabilities who work at the company, with their real life stories about what's going on. But also, you know, real truth from the company itself about how you will be treated and how you will be supported if and when you join the company and come and work for them. I think number two is when you onboard someone. I know, you know, a while ago when I was doing some interviews, you know, you go through all of the different questions and then you try and tell the person who's in the interview a little bit about the company and the values, etc., which we're already all really good at. But then it gets to the point where you're saying, oh, and there's gym membership, and there's a really good canteen, and you know, there's a season ticket loan thing that you can have. But how wonderful would it be to say there's a disability and inclusion committee, and these are all the things we do, and these are all of the charities that we support, and we have mental health first aiders, etc., etc., and all these wonderful kind of things that really show the value of a company, as opposed to saying that we have a subsidized canteen, but don't go there on a Friday because the chips are triple cooked yet on Thursday, you know. But I think also, again, for me, with the, you know, coming back to work, having been away for a long time, is that I guess I was unusual in the fact that, you know, we had, thankfully, very few people come back to work after being away for a while with mental health issues. And I think if you have someone who's on maternity leave and they're, you know, they have regular check-ins while you're off, and then when you get back, you have all of these various stages within the, you know, the getting back to work, especially in the UK. I don't know if it's the same elsewhere. But why wouldn't you have something like that for someone who's been away for whatever reason? And you know, you do have regular check-ins, and they're real, you know, they're real check-ins rather than just tick box exercises. And that the manager of the person who's coming back from being away, you know, has a little check-in with HR who are, you know, up to speed on all of the various things, and that they, you know, that the manager is already prepped for the first day that you come back into work, and then it continues. And I do think that there should be a across all leadership teams in any business, that they are already they talk about it regularly, and they're, you know, they have regular check-ins and training, so they do know what to expect. But then you know, it pushes on a bit from that around, you do have to feel the person coming back, or the person coming on board for the first time, does have to feel that they are worth the they're worthy, and that they do feel safe and they do feel supported. But I mean, and finally, I guess for me, people with mental health problems are amazing people, and we're very fabulous.
Agreed. Simon.
So I think cultural change is the hardest thing to do in any organization. You can have as many policies as you like, and as I mentioned before, policy is really important, but actually normalizing certain behavior or stopping other behaviors is, on a day-to-day level, is really hard. And my thoughts about this are that leadership really does come from the top. And actually, I have seen a tremendous change where I work at Elsevier in the time that I've been there, in that we now have started to have a culture where senior leaders are more honest and truthful with their vulnerabilities, and we talk about lessons learned as well as successes in a business context, but also I think maybe one of the really good things, if you can call it a good thing, about the COVID crisis is I've seen a lot more humanity in the workplace than I've probably ever seen before. And I think that, you know, we all have a responsibility to treat each other kindly and to value each of us for who we are. But I think leaders have a particular responsibility because they set the tone for the rest of the organization. And I think that if we can move towards a society, and certainly within publishing perhaps, where leaders feel comfortable about talking about how they're feeling and some of their challenges, then it means that what we'll have is a much more inclusive workforce at all levels. And it will mean that positive behaviours like inclusion and like kindness and like valuing people for who they are and what they can bring, as opposed to dismissing them for challenges that they might be facing, might be a possibility in the not too distant future.
Thanks. Let's hope. Catherine, go ahead.
I just want to come back onto, to what Simon is saying, and I think he's absolutely right. It should come from the top. For me, I'm obviously not at the top of BMJ, but I am a head of quite a big department. And I came back to work in the July, and for International Mental Health Week, I finally plucked up the courage to do a video about the various things that have happened to me during my life, and to talk about what it's like to get on the tube and be absolutely petrified, or to go into a cinema and see where all of the exits are, because I always needed to have a kind of get out and be able to have exit points that I could use should I need to, and to work out that I could actually get onto the seat in the cinema should someone come in with a gun and try, for everything that was going on. And also during that time, there were lots of, there was the Westminster bombing, and there were lots of things going on in the US with shootings. So anyway, I plucked up the courage to do this video, and the number of messages of support that I received from every corner of our organization was absolutely amazing. And also from, some people who emailed me directly rather than, put onto our intranet, about how they're feeling and how, some of the things that they have to deal with every day around mental health issues and hidden disabilities. And it was really refreshing for me to think that actually, just because I've done this and I've put myself out there to say what's going on in my life, that it actually has helped some others. And I think Simon is right, that the more vulnerable people feel that they're able to be, especially at the top of an organization, then the better for everybody, because it does become more acceptable. And and we talk a lot about the acceptance and everything, but still, for me, even today, saying this more about my my story, it does. I mean, this is like the SSP, and this is our people in my industry are going to see this. But I think, at some point, someone's got to be vulnerable and say these things.
Yeah, and it is very, for me to be able to go to my boss and say, listen, I have an anxiety disorder, and so you're going to see these things sometimes, and just it doesn't make me incompetent, and for them to say, that's cool, that's fine, you do what you got to do, is super duper empowering. Simon, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up just on what Catherine was saying. One thing that has worked really well for us, so I mentioned that I run a Elsevier Enabled, who are a disability employee resource group. So we started about a year ago, 18 months ago maybe, doing a series of kind of blog posts on our company intranet called I Am Enabled, where people talked about their stories, and it went out, on the front page of the internet to all employees. And obviously it was quite a brave thing to do, but we got such a great reaction to it, and it encouraged more people to come forward and said, hey, this is my story. And each person either had lived experience of disability, or they were a carer for somebody with the disability, so that might be a child or a parent. And what it did was it just normalized a culture of disability inclusion in the company where there probably wasn't one before. And so whilst, yes, I'd stand by what I said before, it's important for people at the top to kind of speak out. Actually, what Catherine said before reminded me that we all have a role, and we all can really make a positive impact in normalizing inclusion if we want to.
Okay, so we are a little bit over time, and I haven't wanted to cut anyone off because this has been such a great discussion. Bruce, did you have any final things you want to say?
Sylvia, because I know we're over time, and that is, I don't recall if in the last hour anyone has used the word empathy, but I think if we can somehow start directing leadership of organizations and then have a trickle-down effect to just approach the whole issue of diversity, inclusion, and equity with more empathy, that will be a huge start.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. I just want the audience to think about what steps you can take right now at your organization. We are going to have a list of resources that has been put together by members of our panel and also with contributions from the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And we will post a link to that when this is broadcast. And we will also be taking questions. And I want to thank everyone for watching this webinar, and thank you again to all the panelists for your vulnerability and your insights and for your time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.